I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
And those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Matt Bernico, and I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois.
I'm Dean Detloff. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. This week, we are just pulling together some really wild takes on the internet that we found this week from various sources. It's kind of a quick week for us in our personal lives, so we figured, instead of doing a ton of homework like we always do, we'd just take a moment to shoot the breeze, see who we could dunk on a little. But before we do that, Matt, I understand you've got a Reddit treasure, and I also found a Reddit treasure, so why don't you go first?
Yeah. Okay, so here you go. This is going to be a controversial one, I think, but it's important. So on Reddit, 27 days ago, this question was asked: is there an afterlife for the animals? Is there an afterlife for the animals? Do animals have souls? And more specifically, cats and dogs that have been loved by their owners?
Sanctified through their owner's love. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty great. It's really funny. It's like, well, is there an afterlife for animals? Do animals have souls? But specifically, cats and dogs have been loved by their owners. Like, foreclosing on the final destinies of all those other animals who haven't been loved by their owners.
Yeah. Two things come to mind for me. The first is All Dogs Go to Heaven. I've seen the movie, saw that documentary.
Right.
So and they even made a sequel to it. Yeah. So it's obviously true. The second, though, if cats, let's say, who aren't loved by their owners don't go to heaven, I feel like Christians suddenly have a very overwhelming missional duty to find a lot of cats to love really quickly. Otherwise, we're willfully consigning them to hell. I
think it's important to get more cats in your life. Or dogs.
I think that's true.
Dogs are great, too. I like them both. Love all your animals out there and get them into heaven through your love. Is how this one works. Okay, here's a quick answer to this question that somebody else on Reddit gave.
Yeah.
It's great. Okay, so another user comments and says, most likely not, but at least we have our memories of our beloved pets. And then the OP says, but I don't like the idea that animals don't live forever. And then they continue on. So if I don't like it, it means that this idea is not from God? So, clearly so.
I think so. I think that's right. That is how I construct my theology, personally.
I gotta tell you, I also don't like the idea that animals don't live forever. So it's obviously not from God.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we took our dogs to get a blessing at church. That's the thing that Catholics do. Though hilariously, we left the cats at home because we couldn't get them into the carrier. So, I don't know. There's too many contingencies involved here. I feel like it's all or nothing. Either all the good pets and the rest of their friends, the rest of the animals in the world go to heaven, or none of them do. They just disappear.
Think about all the cows that are going to be pissed off when they're in heaven because you've eaten them. You are responsible for killing them.
Oh, gosh. Cow heaven is a very vindictive place. I don't care what they say about redemption and, righting all those wrongs and wiping away all those tears. There's just a whole mess of very angry bovines waiting for their just rewards. I feel like in cow religion, all humans for sure go to hell.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Hey, Beef and Dairy Network, if you're out there listening, get at us, and we're going to do an episode on that for you. just TM, but we'll work with you on this if you want to collab.
Yeah. 100%. All right, well, let me throw this one at you. The question is very simple, but there's some good responses, and I'll let you give your own before I read a few of these. But the question is simply, are ghosts demons in disguise? No further details.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Are ghosts demons, but in disguise? Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's why they have that white sheet over them, right? Because, like, if they just looked like... If they didn't have that white ghostly Scooby-Doo sheet on them, then you'd know they're demons right away. But they wear the sheet, so you don't know that they're secretly demons. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also because demons are so short, they need to be several demons high in order to wear that white sheet in the first place. So you can get more demons in a room as one ghost than you could if just discrete demons came into a room.
That's true. And as Thomas Aquinas said in the Summa Theologica, 2 demons equal 1 ghost, right? Because they have to stand on each other's shoulders. Usually, at least.
Yeah, that's right.
Depending on how tall they are.
Yeah, well, those are medieval demons too. I mean, these modern demons, they're so lazy you can't get them to do anything. You need at least 3 or 4 just to create a demon pile on the bottom, and then you can stack the rest on top.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So what are
all these millennial demons?
What did the great users at Reddit.com have to say about this?
Yeah, there are several really good ones, but I'm going to start out strong. This one is, if ghosts were real, they'd be naked, since clothes aren't supernatural. Doesn't exactly address the question of whether or not ghosts are demons in disguise, but it does introduce a new kind of more interesting angle on the question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta kill your clothes before you die. That's kind of like a part of it.
Yeah. Here's a few more. The Bible's silent on the matter except for this. When we die, our spirits go directly to wherever they're supposed to go, either torments or paradise. So if, and this is a big if, there are legitimate cases where people are seeing, quote, ghosts, they aren't seeing dead human spirits. So some other form of spiritual being would have to be the case, either demon or angel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's like some pretty sound theology right there, actually. You know, the weird thing about ghosts is that people... Okay, I watch a lot of ghost content in my day-to-day life.
That's why I asked you. It's an expert opinion.
Well, I appreciate that. The thing that is weird about all this ghost content is that people are like, oh man, do ghosts exist or not? And it's crazy because if you think that they do exist, then the more astounding thing isn't that ghosts exist, but that people don't ever die and they just wander around Earth forever. And I think that's like the part that people miss. That I think
you're right.
If ghosts exist, they're just wandering around naked all the time.
Well, let me read a few more because this is a good way to segue into a few others. Here's one. Yes, ghosts are demons in disguise. There are no ghosts or spirits or dead people walking about. All these are demons out to fool people into trusting or believing in something other than the truth. And the OP says, so that's why they go into abandoned or old places, ? And this person replies, if you go there hoping to find a ghost, yes.
That's what they... I love this. It's like, well, that's where they know that you're going to go looking for them, so that's where they're going to hang out.
Yeah, it all depends on the intent. Whoever's looking for them, that's where you'll find them. A couple other good ones. Here's one. No, demons were never human, so they can't be ghosts in disguise. And
that's missing the point.
Yeah, it is. Hence the OP says that's why I said disguise. To which this person just says in all caps, no.
That's pretty good. Hey, so Dean, if you were a demon, just speaking hypothetically here, what would your disguise look like?
Yeah, I think it would really depend on where people were looking to find the ghost. First of all,
if they're
looking in an abandoned or old place, I mean, I'm going to look different than if they're looking for me in whatever, some rich hoity-toity beach house.
Exactly right. You don't want to haunt a big mansion looking like an old coal miner. That doesn't make any sense. People would be like, "What are you doing here? You're not scared."
Yeah, exactly. I do like beach house ghosts, though, now that I think about it. Just a bucket hat full of fish hooks. Well, I guess the question really comes down to whether or not I'm allowed to have ghost clothes.
Dean, can we make a pact right now that when one of us dies, the other will go and kill the other person's clothes so that we can wear them in the afterlife?
Yeah, I promise. I promise 100%. It's on record.
Thanks.
And I want to read just this very, very last response and we can move on. I think not only are ghosts demons in disguise, but aliens are also demons in disguise.
Okay, I like this. This is opening up the universe a little bit more for us to play in here. I like that a lot. Yeah. You know, there's actually Well, there's a lot of okay, so I watch a lot of ghost content. I can also consume a lot of alien content as well, and there's a lot of alien content that posits that angels are actually, or I'm sorry, aliens are actually angels. So this is just the opposite.
That's right. So now we got it. The ghosts are demons, aliens are angels. It's all slowly coming together. The question is, what are these other kind of cryptids? You know, Bigfoot, big feet. What are they?
Yeah, vampires, mummies.
I thought you were saying big feet are vampires.
No.
Just crossing all the streams here.
No, I'm just saying like a Bigfoot, a vampire, a mummy. Like what kind of sort of theological correlations do they have as well? Because it seems like they must. They're all. I mean, like they're all demons, I guess. I don't think Bigfoot is a demon though, because Bigfoot seems pretty chill.
He loves that beef jerky.
He
gets demon rage for beef jerky if the commercials are to be believed.
He's not hungry for human flesh, just for that beef jerky, that Jack Links.
He will commit some heavenly crimes for that beef jerky. All right. Speaking of beef jerky, here's a great transition into our first article that we want to talk about this week. What if Jesus returns while you're loafing at work? Is the title. By one Reverend Ben Johnson, just my least favorite Orthodox priest, it turns out. And I love this question. What if Jesus returns while you're just eating one of them sweet smoky Jack Links at work?
You're taking a quick break and you're loafing, and then all of a sudden you turn around and Jesus is there, and he's like, listen, you're going to go to cow heaven next.
If you know what I mean.
That's right. Okay.
What a euphemism.
Yeah, I mean, a while back we had a really good and strong one-sided rivalry with Joe Carter, but now we got it going on here with Reverend Ben Johnson, who has been posting a lot on the Acton Institute website. So yeah, what would happen?
Hang on.
Yeah.
Just back up. I love that you say posting a lot on the Acton Institute website, because it is actually just basically a one-sided Reddit blog.
Yeah, for sure. The portion of the Acton Institute website this comes from is their power blog, which I imagine requires no editorial sort of oversight.
They receive the power from a lot of horrifying sources. Just the overtaxed work of child energy. That's the power of the power blog.
That's right. What if
that's a callback to that one time that they defended child labor.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, so Reverend Ben Johnson, he wants us to consider all that time we spend at work not working. Boy, is that a problem, Reverend Ben Johnson thinks. I almost said Reverend Jen Bonson, and I think that's good. Let's keep that going.
Yeah, Jen Bonson indeed.
So, okay, he starts off this article making a really dumb argument, and then finishes the article making an equally dumb argument. So basically, he's like, in the Bible where it's like, Jesus is going to come when you least expect it. And you might think that's like in the middle of the night or something, because that's how the parable goes. But Jen Ronson says, but suppose Jesus did not come at midnight. Imagine Christ came back in the middle of a weekday afternoon. For most of us, that would mean that Jesus Christ would return while we're at work. And that could be the most fearful thing indeed. Multiple studies...
Not now!
Yeah, sorry. Multiple studies show... I don't know which studies, just multiple of them. They show that if Christ wanted to return when they are paying no attention or virtually asleep on their feet, the workday would be the ideal time. Okay, so this is... you see where this is going already. You want to be a virtuous worker. You don't want to be wasting your time on the clock, because Jesus could come back at any moment and he'd be like, Jeremy, why aren't you answering these dang emails?
You're going to hell.
And then
Jeremy, quit playing Angry Birds. I'm taking you to cow heaven.
Jeremy the worker would be like, okay, Jesus, I'm already in hell though.
I love multiple studies though, so great, because I get the point that he's trying to make, but I just love the idea of like a bunch of social scientists being like, all right, now what would be the optimal time for Christ to return while we're not paying attention?
They're all sweating over a table with protractors and compasses, and they're just trying to figure it out.
Oh dang, hold on, I just figured out the whole loophole to this entire article.
Please.
So Reverend Jen Bonson just really saved me, I think, at the final hour, because now I expect that Jesus will come when I'm wasting my time at work. Nailed it.
So now he won't. He can't come.
Thank you, Reverend Ben.
Jesus can't come when you think he might. So that's the important part. Well,
gonna have to get me some other time.
Yeah. Kind of playing around my schedule of expectations. So Reverend Ben Johnson goes on to say some really important statistics that we all should really consider. He says the average American wastes 21.8 hours a week at work. More than half of the work week, he says.
Nice.
Researchers found the top 5 ways employees waste time at work are personal email use, social networks, sports sites, mobile games, and online shopping. Employees spend a full 56 minutes each day by using their mobile devices for non-work activities. According to a survey from something called Office Team. I don't know who they are either, but this is where Ben Johnson's coming from. So, that's kind of the point. Like, he thinks that we should be better workers because it will honor the Lord. He concludes his article by making one final push for us to be better workers. So all of this means that the way we conduct our business life affects our eternal life. Whether we are honest, industrious, conscientious, or slothful at work cannot be separated from our souls in a perfectly compartmentalized life.
Oh no, I've got bad news for me.
To be caught by the bridegroom while plugging along half-heartedly at work may mean being taken to our final judgment in sin. God intends our diligent labor to prove fruitful, for trade to scatter the gifts he has given each region, and from honest relationships in the marketplace to forge bonds of peace between neighbors and nations. May the Lord find us watching and heeding his commandments whenever he comes, even if it blindsides us at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. So I think there's a lot to hate in this article. Reverend Ben Johnson really has no, I think, actually good sort of biblical or theological reasons to think the things he does here. But he sure thinks them. That's for because of people out there, like the multiple studies and Office Team. He thinks it to be the case that we need to conduct our business life in a way that might reflect our eternal life.
I really feel like this article, in addition to just being dumb in general, is so poorly written that you have to actually reverse engineer an argument out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
What is even being said here? So, the two things that are being implied are that, like you said earlier, suppose Jesus didn't come at midnight, but he came back in the middle of your workday or whatever. Suppose that. I don't know. Do you think that Jesus is going to be like, you're playing Angry Birds now? I'm so sorry. I should have come an hour earlier when you were working on those reports for Mike, but I'm sorry. This is the time. This is it. So I guess you have to go to hell. What? It doesn't, even as a heuristic device, it's so bizarre and absurd. And the same toward the end that your business life should affect your eternal life. I really, 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 really don't believe, at the end, when you go chat with St. Peter at the pearly gates, and he's like, I'm so sorry, but you wasted pretty much half your work week at a shitty job where you got exploited every day. You can't come in. This is the kind of thing that definitely lands you in cow heaven.
You go straight to cow heaven. We have had a few conversations on this podcast about hell, and, sometimes it's kind of a difficult theological concept, but cow heaven's something you can get behind, where it exists and people go there for sure. It's kind of like hell, but different, where there you get stamped by cows all day because you ate too many Big Macs. Well,
our business life affects our eternal life. I guess that's what we're saying in a way.
I guess that's what we're saying. So say Ben Johnson's right. But think about how embarrassing it would be to be the manager of anything, and then Jesus comes back and Jesus is like, hey, what have you been up to today? Well, I drank coffee for about 35 minutes and I chastised my workers for not working hard enough. And then I asked everyone if they could come in on Saturday, and then I asked them if they could also come in on Sunday, and Jesus would be like, wait a minute.
We've got to have a word. I love, one of my favorite things to do in a new group of people is to share stories about time theft, because I think that's really great.
Oh, time theft's awesome.
Time theft is so good. So I used to work at a Christian bookstore. I think I've said that on this podcast several times before. And our boss is always going on about time theft. And so time theft, if you've never heard of it, is when your boss tells you that you shouldn't do anything that's just for you because you're stealing time from the company that they're paying you for. And my favorite thing was to go to into the bathroom for a very long time and not necessarily do anything, but just like collect my own psyche for a moment, because it's an extremely taxing environment to work in. Mm-hmm. And I loved it because if you sit in a bathroom for 20 minutes and you come out, no one can accuse you of time theft because they don't know if you're taking a dump or not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Pro tip.
Yeah, pro tip. That's good. Time theft, I don't know. It's not something I'm concerned about ever.
I really want just an Ocean's 11 scheme of time theft.
Oh my gosh.
I want the ultimate heist.
Yeah, that's great. I think something that's really interesting though, so this is the media studies perspective on this a little bit too, right? Because there's a part of this that is only possible because of the type of labor that people do in 2019. You know, the increasingly digitized and specialized types of labor. So if it is actually the case that the average American wastes 21.8 hours of work a week or whatever, that could actually be a real statistic, and I'd probably believe it. But what's really weird about that is I imagine that 21.8 hours is extremely fractalized over and throughout the day, because that's kind of the way that office work is. That's how office work usually happens, where you're working on something for a few minutes and you feel like you've completed a task or whatever, and now you're going to do something else. You're going to look at Twitter or whatever, and then you're going to go back to doing work, and then you're going to go back to looking at Twitter, right? We have to have this there's something about the way that office work works, or how we perform office work, where we have to shove little pieces of cognitive distraction between the things that we're doing, because labor is way more fractalized and our time is different than I think it used to be, or even there's a lot more to say about the way work expands far beyond an 8-hour workday too, but still cognitive labor is such a weird thing to begin with. We should take every opportunity we can to distract ourselves from whatever we're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's also just the idea that all of your work should be profitable work where you're generating profit for somebody who owns your labor is such a strange idea in general. I mean, we've talked about alienation in work several times in this podcast before. But yeah, the very premise that if you're taking just a few minutes to yourself, like you said, fractalized over a long period of time such that it adds up to a significant amount of time, the idea that is bad just feels so morally repugnant to me. Just on a basic level, not even just on a Christian level, but just a regular old, this is a crazy thing for a person to think from a moral perspective, I guess. Just a really bizarre take.
Yeah, it totally is a super bizarre take.
Well, let me switch us over to another article about work found in the Acting Institute blog by somebody else. Lori Murrow, PhD. She wrote a pretty wild article that I think has some interesting kind of resonances, actually, with the one that we were just looking at. So the title is called CEO OSB, The Rule of St. Benedict Promotes Entrepreneurial Culture. Really bold title. So the premise of this article in broad strokes is basically to say that the rule of St. Benedict is not just a old dusty thing that Catholic scholars or some monks care about or whatever, but has some ideas that are useful for entrepreneurship. So she says, for example, organizations adhering to the rule must generate revenue sufficient to cover their operational costs and fund their charitable efforts. Moreover, the rule's lack of central planning regarding product selection and production has enabled monasteries over the centuries to adapt remarkably well to changing market conditions, expanding, diversifying, or reorganizing as necessary. I love that. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of monasteries as just big, huge corporate firms. Long before the term niche market was coined, Benedictines were producing high-quality, niche-marketed specialty goods. I loved it in the medieval period when people were just using the equivalent of Pinterest to find their favorite craft beers. So this is great. This actually introduces it, but the real crux of the whole thing centers around this wild company that I didn't know existed. I mean, it doesn't anymore, but I didn't know it was a thing until today, called lasermonks.com. Which is very funny. Apparently, some monks were totally outraged by the price of printer cartridges, so they decided to just sell their own for little to no profit. which is pretty amazing. And she kind of runs this whole argument that she's trying to make about the rule of St. Benedict based on lasermonks.com. But it ends up being like super self-defeating. So let me just explain the situation. We'll get into it. So she says the lasermonks.com, basically they actually expanded super quickly, and they made a ton of money, like millions of dollars. So she says lasermonks.com achieved enormous success quickly thanks to a clever concept brilliantly marketed. Suddenly, the 6 monks and a handful of volunteers found themselves running a $3.5 million business. With a rate of growth beyond the monks' wildest expectations, they were overwhelmed by the need to scale up their business and, more significantly, found themselves distracted from the primary reason for joining the monastery, their wish to serve God. The Benedictine way is all about balance, said one former monk. The strain of overwork led to a life out of balance. The monastery soon dwindled from 6 monks to 3. Ultimately, the monks dispersed, and the monastery sold all its goods at auction in October 2011. In business terms, lasermonks.com had grown too fast for its capacity. No amount of good intentions can overturn the law of economics. So, insanely, in this article that's ostensibly about how the rule of St. Benedict is actually promoting an entrepreneurial culture, she shares this one example of it happening, but then that example completely implodes on herself, and she just reports on that as though it's completely incidental to anything that she said, and it just blows my mind. So lasermonks.com, apparently at first this example of entrepreneurial culture, and later a very good example as to why actually the rule of St. Benedict is probably a really bad way to run your business.
Yeah, totally. This is actually really interesting too. I mean, lasermonks.com, whatever, that's actually very funny that they're selling printer cartridges. But that made me think of another example too. In Commonweal, back like in February, I think, there was a really cool article called Taming the Demon, How Desert Monks Put Work in Its Place. And
right.
Yeah, if you guys didn't read it out there, you probably should. Actually, it's really interesting. But there were these like Benedictine monks that lived in the desert, and that's where they started their own web design service, which was like but it was like in the mid 90s, so it's especially interesting and fun.
Yeah.
It was called the Scriptorium, if I remember correctly. But like what's interesting about the article though is that, like, I mean, just exactly what Dr. Lori P. Morrow is saying right here too, actually, but like this article does it better because it's Commonweal and not the Power Blog. But basically the point is that like they grew too big, and all of a sudden, like, since they were monks, like they like had to stop. There's even this part in the article too that's really interesting, where it's like some of the monks who were like really good at web design, they got taken off of the assignment to do web design because like that's part of the Benedictine sort of like polity, where if like you're too good at something that it could cause you to be boastful, they'll like make you stop. You know, like so exactly the good idea for like entrepreneurship. Like you're the best people who are really good at something, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, this article is so wild too, because she also talks about how one of the monks who was like running the operation was paid $0 in salary, and like the entire premise of the whole operation is that the profitability just gets immediately invested into charitable, non-profitable goals. And it just makes absolutely zero sense, because like that's really bad entrepreneurial advice, actually. Like, take all the capital that you generate and then invest it into things that will do nothing for you is not how entrepreneurship works.
Yeah, exactly.
So bizarre.
Like the fundamentals of entrepreneurship from the perspective of monks are just like don't get too big, don't be cocky and really proud of your work, and also give all your money to somebody else. All right, chill, man. Sounds good, I guess, but not what I would expect. Not what I would go to a business class and ever hear, I'm sure.
Yeah. The reason this especially kind of came to mind after the Reverend Jen Bonson article was just this idea that, like, you know, if all of your time is just like working for a profit, and that's like what it means to be holy or whatever, then like in fact that's not really how it works in, for example, even the Acton Institute's own bizarre, like, complicated plurality of voices trying to figure out what to do with like a Christian tradition that isn't exactly business friendly, but also trying their very, very hardest to shill for Christians in business. It's just like a very confused think tank.
Yeah, it is very confused. Hey, speaking of that confusion, something that the Acton Institute likes to do a lot, and I think just like more right-leaning Christians like to do a lot is take all of those critiques of capitalism that the left likes to use and explain how they're not actually about capitalism, but they're actually about crony capitalism.
Yeah. That's right. The worst of all.
Right, so everything you don't like about capitalism is actually because capitalism just isn't being done right.
I hate those cronies.
I hate how the cronies are always out there not doing it right. They're messing up our capitalism, you know? So, in a recent article from April 12th, on the Acton Institute Power blog, Michael Matheson Miller writes, "Does capitalism always become crony?" I think this is a really important question, because if it always does, then it must be bad, right?
It must be.
Well, guess what? There's a not bad one. Cool. So this is what Michael Matheson Miller says. "One of the critiques of capitalism, from progressives to traditionalist Catholics, is that despite all the talk of free markets, capitalism always ends up in crony capitalism. Supporters of the market economy claim that this is a distortion of capitalism, and it is government intervention that is the culprit. But this can often sound like the socialist who tells us, despite the evidence from the Soviet Union, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela, that real socialism hasn't been tried."
All the same country, by the way.
They're all actually the same one. Yep. How should we think about the relationship between capitalism and crony capitalism? Is it the case that capitalism always becomes captured by special interests, or can we create and maintain what Luigi Zingales has called the you know him, the great economist Luigi?
Yeah.
What Luigi Zingales has called capitalism for the people. A capitalism that doesn't simply favor the wealthy and well-connected at the expense of everyone else. Capitalism for the people. That's what they call it there. Anyways, I thought this article was worth pointing out because it's a funny reframing, or it's a funny way to bring this like question of crony capitalism to a logical conclusion. Whereas, like, does it always become crony capitalism? Because it seems like it's the case. But Luigi Zingales and Michael Matheson Miller think, no, of course not. You could do something different. Capitalism for the people. It's not clear what that is. I don't actually think that's possible to do this. I mean, maybe you could make it a little bit nicer for people sometimes. But special interests will always capture capitalism because, like, that's how capitalism that's how you make the most money, like, right? Like, that's just the way it works. Capitalism always becomes crony capitalism. Or, I mean, maybe better stated, crony capitalism is just capitalism. That's what it looks like when it works right.
Yeah.
Like, it's so weird to even be a libertarian and think that there could be a way to design a system that is like that without massive governmental intervention. Like, I don't understand even how you would do that. Like, if you want to design a system that prohibits crony capitalism, what you've done is, like, started yourself down the path to, like, a regulated economy, which is, I imagine, what Luigi and the gang don't want.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I've always preferred Luigi's brother, Mario Zingales, the real socialism for the people economist. And
then his other nemesis, Waluigi Zingales, who is definitely the communist of the group.
That's right. I love King Bowser's Soviet Kingdom. This article is so crazy though, because he also goes on to say in here, he says part of the problem is that we've unhinged market economies from any real consideration of morality. This applies to the legal but unfair and unjust practice of crony capitalism in the regulated sectors of the economy. And then he goes on to sort of talk a little bit more about that. But the craziest thing of it is, like, he kind of admits himself that, like, he doesn't really have any idea what to do about it. He says, "I'm not suggesting that regulation is the best answer." He says, "It's a complicated topic with no immediate or simple solution. The commercial society grew out of a certain culture with certain beliefs and standards. A lot of what we need to do is reframe how we think about the economy in light of human flourishing and the common good." And it's like, I don't know if this person has ever talked to rich people, but I don't think that he's going to get a real consideration of morality going in time for capitalism to get away from being a rapacious, horrific force on the planet.
It's so weird, though, because it's like, oh, what we need to do, I mean, instead, like, it's the opposite of cultural Marxism, right? It's like, we need a cultural conservatism that will convince people just to be better. And, like,
right.
What in the world are you talking about? Like, how would that possibly happen? Like, how are you going to launch a social campaign to like reinstill conservative values in rich people? Good luck.
Yeah, I love those like markets that are totally tied to morality, those capitalist markets that just are always constantly thinking about the common good. Those things really go together. Like competition. I love just friendly competition where nobody's out to really undercut anybody, but they're just all like playing a really fun game, and at the end of the day everybody kind of wins.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best type of competition, for sure.
Yep. So does capitalism always become crony? No, it just always stays regular old capitalism.
It's always just capitalism.
all we have is the cronies.
Okay, here's one more that I thought would be interesting to pull out. There's not much to it really, but we'll just talk about it real fast. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is from October 2nd, 2018, so a little bit dated, but still pretty good. This is kind of like a recap of or maybe some media criticism about Die Linke in Germany from a journalist or a power blogger named Kai Weiss. So the article title is called "Jesus Would Have Voted Socialist, Says Germany's Left." This one stuck out to me on the power blog because I agree, he probably would have. I mean, Jesus wouldn't have voted at all probably, but like, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kai Weiss responding to Die Linke, who had a sign that said Jesus would have voted socialist. That's kind of like what spurred this on. Says, well, that's weird. I'm bewildered by this because the track record between socialists and religion is extremely bad. Explain this more. Kai Weiss says, what's the track record of socialists and more so the left party on religion? Of course, Karl Marx once noted that religion is the opium of the people, which is bad, since in their view, communism should be the opium. That's not that's not what Marx says. Sorry.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Marx himself noted that religion is the opium of the people, which is bad, since in their view, communism should be the opium. By that, Marx means, according to Kai Weiss, should be what people believe in, not some mystic church of the Middle Ages. I'm sorry, not some mystic church of the Dark Ages.
People are always believing in opium.
That's the thing about opium, is people are believing in it all the time. And that's definitely what that metaphor meant. Kai Weiss goes on to say, thus, the conflict between socialism and the church began quickly, a conflict which is continuing to this day when we look at China. It was a dominant factor in communist regimes of the 20th century where the despots tried to subordinate the church and eliminate religion once and for all. But again and again, Christianity stood tall. Indeed, it spurred the revolution of conscience in Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, where Pope John Paul II played an instrumental part in the fall of the Soviet Union. There's a lot of things to say about this, but like... Remember all those times when communism tried to destroy Christianity and actually just like bolstered it by making it a part of like the Central Party? Remember when they made a specific place in their society for Christians and other religious people? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Poland also not looking super great as a counterexample these days. Yeah, I mean, like, whatever. Sometimes, many times, significant times, communists actually super messed up when it came to Christians. That's fine.
Totally.
That's true. But it is not true that the conflict is really between socialism and Christianity per se. It's between socialism and the forces of counter-revolution. And, like, you know, sometimes Christians aren't super down with actually sharing their stuff.
Yeah, totally. Just one more of these articles that's just like, you know, adding fuel to that fire and like using a lot of convenient but like simplified historical examples.
Yeah, one thing that frustrates me about this guy in particular is he ends the article saying the assertion that Jesus would have voted for the Socialist Party and for its, you know, the legacy of socialism, for the party which suppressed Christianity for decades, the party which the church fought against for decades and ultimately peacefully put out of power, and the party which normally never talks about anything religious approvingly, is nothing but abominable. And okay, like the history of German socialism is a complicated history, and that's fine, but like there were actually Christians in communist Germany who supported the Communist Party. It's like a very long and interesting history that's worth people looking at. And the idea that like the church is just automatically sort of against a socialist state, or has always been against socialist states, just betrays an extremely naive and simplistic understanding of the history of like actually existing communism and actually existing Christianity.
Yeah, that quote that the article ends with is also frustrating too, because it doesn't recognize okay, so just like you said, the story of Christianity and communism, as we know in this podcast exceedingly well, is very complicated, and sometimes it's bad. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's like, neither, or just, whatever. But like, that's true, but when they say that the assertion, however, that Jesus would have voted for all of this, for the party which suppressed Christianity for decades, the party which the church fought against for decades and ultimately peacefully put out of power, like, that is frustrating, because while that might have been the position of some communist parties, or socialist parties or socialist movements or whatever, I mean, there are plenty of like right-wing parties that actively killed Christians in other countries, like, with no problem, right? Like, so there are instances in which socialist parties and communist parties persecuted Christians because of their reactionary tendencies, but like in the West, Christians and parties that support Christianity for more or less had no problem in like indiscriminately killing people of other religions for basically no reason.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other crazy thing about this is, I mean, when people make this argument, they never ever, exactly what you're saying, talk about different regimes that are completely welcomed at the table of international capitalism, who are like even right now murdering and attacking Christians. Like Bolsonaro in Brazil just not too long ago was saying that the church is like one of his biggest enemies. Liberation theology is like extremely bad news, and he's hanging out with Davos people and whatever like capitalist head of state is happy that Lula isn't presently the president of Brazil. Or like in a place like the Philippines, like Duterte, who's this horrible dictator, is always talking about how bad the church is and how the church is like a big thorn in his side, a huge problem. But people are still trading with him, sending him, all the money that he can muster, I guess. And it's just like crazy that never registers as a connection between capitalism having reasons to actually oppose Christians who organize and build movements on the premise of their Christianity, such that they would feel compelled to say, no, you probably shouldn't destroy like the Amazon rainforest in the name of like industry. Those two things are always separable, but like with socialism, these things are always just obviously combined.
Yeah, totally. It's some really interesting rhetoric that I think is under-investigated.
It's true. Free paper for anybody who wants to write that, I guess.
All right. So we've been through a lot of Acton Institute stuff, and the Acton Institute is just it is an just ever-flowing stream of bad content.
You shouldn't read it. You should not, right now, do not go look at it. Don't give them any clicks or likes or anything. Don't worry. If there's something exceedingly terrible, we will tell you about it.
I mean, it's so bad you don't even need to read it. It would be... Yeah. You don't even need... There's no hot takes you can have about these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Other than, I guess, dunking on them, but whatever. But to round us out, we're gonna take a side step away from the Acton Institute and toward something a little bit different. So, Dean, do you want to introduce this to us?
Yeah, in my research on Christianity and socialism, I'm just always wondering how people think about these things. And I thought one thing I don't often do is just ask a pastor. And that's something that we've done once or twice on this podcast, and I just thought it would be good to do one more time. And conveniently for me, Pastor Dr. Joel C. Hunter on YouTube has a convenient couple-minute video here asking the very question, is Jesus a socialist? And I think it is probably worth us talking about it just because, he lays out a pretty strong case for his own position here.
Brad asks, is Jesus a socialist? I feel he isn't and have been troubled with this debate. Well, I wasn't aware of the debate, but I agree with you. No, Brad, Jesus is not a socialist. He is just our reason for being very generous. Some people look back to Acts chapter 2, verses 44 and 45, and this is what it says, "And all those who believed were together and had all things in common, and they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing with them with all as anyone might have need." Now, of course, they're talking about the first church. And some people would interpret that as a form of socialism. Or they take Jesus' quote to the rich young ruler in Matthew 19:21, where it says, Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me," as a prescriptive rather than a descriptive passage. That is, saying this is what you have to do rather than just describing what had been done. But he said that to the rich young ruler because he knew riches were a stronghold in this rich young ruler's life, and they really had replaced God in his life. That's why the rich young ruler walked away very sorrowful he didn't do it. Socialism is a form of government where you are forced to share. But Christianity is a faith community where we want to share. So as Christians, we want to love our neighbor and share with the needy in ways that will empower him or her to share with others. But being forced to do so by government is the opposite of being motivated by love. God wants us to be joyful in our giving, not resentful in the government's taking. I am for policies that help the vulnerable and the needy. But Jesus would want Christians to help from faith, not force.
There you have it. Pastor Dr. Joel C. Hunter.
Pastor Dr. Joel C. Hunter has all of the greatest hits of why Jesus is not a socialist. Which, I mean, again, Jesus wasn't a socialist, but that's not the point. I love so much when people are like, "Oh, the rich young ruler." Jesus did not mean that thing that he said. He meant something different.
Yeah, I love the rich young ruler thing for two reasons in Pastor Dr. Joel Hunter's words here. The first being that the criticism is that riches had replaced God in his life, not a thing that Jesus says. But secondly, Pastor Dr. Joel C. Hunter will never, ever in a million years tell a rich person that he knows that his riches or her riches have replaced God in their life, and they should go give them all away if they want to serve God.
That's true. A lot of other things probably are replacing God in that person's life, though, like their selfishness or their lazy work ethic, though.
Yeah.
Not their riches, though.
That's right. It's just so crazy to make a story like that, for example, a completely solely singular story that only had relevance in that one specific circumstance and will never ever have relevance ever again in history.
Yeah, it's really cool. I love how that works out. I love how it's just so cool to me that in this instance Jesus definitely does not mean that part. Oh, that no. That is metaphorically, in the big picture of his life, the riches were just kind of filling that God-shaped hole in his life or whatever. It's great. It's great that we can do that. That's such a good and fun hermeneutic that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Also, he talks about the Acts passage describing the early church. I always love that too, the idea that this is a totally voluntary thing. This goes back to one of the strongest points that Jose Miranda makes in the book Communism in the Bible that we talked about a long time ago, is that many people will admit that the early church has a voluntary socialism that's practiced, but they'll never, for that reason, assume that could ever be practiced ever again. It's like, whether you like it or not, that is how the early church organized itself. And pastors just sort of gloss over that as a thing completely lost to time and history.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, totally. Pastor Dr. Joel C. Hunter, please don't do this to us anymore.
I also love that Pastor Dr. Joel C. Hunter says at the beginning that he's not even aware that there's a debate that Jesus is a socialist, and then goes on to talk about two arguments that people often have.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, just it's good though if he can. That's why he's a doctor and a pastor, right? Because he can kind of make those judgments right off the cuff. Hey, looking at this video has definitely screwed up my YouTube algorithm. Now I'm getting some really wild videos that they want me to watch. So that's not great. Don't go looking for this video either, or else you'll be in the same boat as me. You'll be getting advertisements to watch a video called "This woman shot herself, went to hell, and then to heaven, and then back to earth," and that could be you.
Oh no! Why aren't we talking about that?
I know. I don't know why.
I want to hear what cow heaven is like.
Well, no, she didn't go to cow heaven. She went to hell.
Yeah, right. Well,
and then to heaven, but not to cow heaven, which is kind of suspect.
Yeah.
That is a significant hole in the story that she leaves out cow heaven from this equation.
I was under the impression that cow heaven for humans essentially ends up being hell.
Okay, but it's heaven for cows.
Yeah, of course, it's heaven for cows.
I see. That is possible, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, who knows how all this metaphysical stuff works? Not me.
No. All I know is that there is definitely a cow heaven, and
obviously
a people heaven.
We know that.
And there's also a hell, but it could be. Are there other animal heavens though too? Is there snake heaven, and that's also bad for people?
We know there's not snake heaven. This is in Genesis chapter 2 or 3.
Okay, yeah, good point. Is there shark heaven though?
Okay, animals I know there's a heaven for: cows, doves for sure in heaven. Let's see, whales, because I ate Jonah that one time on purpose, and that was good. So there's definitely a whale heaven. Oxen, there's a lot of ox in the Bible. Donkeys, there's that one talking donkey, the talking ass, as I love to say when I was a little kid.
Lions, right? Lions for sure.
Yeah. Well, lions and lambs are complicated because they're supposed to be in regular heaven.
Just lying down together.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that is kind of... I mean, think about it like that, though. They have to be together in heaven.
That's true. So I guess there is evidence, after all, that all animals do go to heaven.
Yeah. Well...
Billions and billions of ants.
Ant heaven sucks. I hate ant heaven.
Ant heaven is disgusting. Before we talk a little bit more about animal heaven, though, I do want to just bring us back to one very important comment on this video from Night Muffin 937, who says, Jesus is not a socialist, he's a liberal. Didn't he vandalize people's stores in some flea market? That's something liberals will do. It has one like.
That's true, liberals will do that. Liberals are always going to the flea market and just messing it all up.
I loved when Jesus went to the flea market and just vandalized some people's stores. He was doing some graffiti on some shitty camel stand.
He made a big anarchy sign on someone's American flag booth.
It was a liberal sign.
Oh, sorry. It's just a big L for liberal.
It's just something liberals do.
I appreciate that. That's really great. Hey, thanks for listening to Magnificast. This week the week before last week, we did a roundup of all of those things about Christians and socialism from the left, and now we did it for the right because we do fair and balanced journalism on this podcast. We wanted to get
no spin zone
here. We wanted to get all of the perspectives for you, our listeners, so you can choose which ones you would like to select as a big marketplace for ideas. If you like this type of high quality, no spin journalism, you can support us at the Magnificast. At patreon.com/the Magnificast. You can follow us on Twitter, just at the Magnificast. We got a Facebook group where someone has corrected us about biblical fanfic, and I appreciate that. Cool. There's also the Friendly Fire retreat coming up, and you should go tell a rich person they should give all of their money to that retreat. And you could also give a few bucks too if you have it. Or not, whatever. Cool. The music, intro music is by Amari Armstrong, and outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. See you next time.
Church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.